This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, Truth Seekers. We are back for another week of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. I took us back one slide. I did a little more research. First, I actually want to mention I had a good friend last week tell me I was making his ears bleed by pronouncing Illinois incorrectly. So I'm sorry to say that I had in the past mispronounced that word. I will do my best to make sure that I do not use the wrong version of it again. Thank you, Reno. All right, so I took us back to the Public Service Company of Northern Illinois. So I had mentioned that in 2010, while going through some of Jack's things, I found a run of pictures that included him in the Chicago, Illinois area, and also this particular power plant company, which we will see a huge theme of power plants. So I went on to go ahead and complete some research in regards to this company. Aside from it being Waukegan power plant, I was able to find out that in 1893, Thomas Edison is bought out by General Electric. I thought that was big because, of course, I have this General Electric connection with Jack. We know that he worked for General Electric. So basically what had happened here is there was a second vice president named Samuel Insull of GE. He was actually asked to take the presidency position at this company, and he declined to do so, but offered to stay on until the merger of the Thomas Edison companies had been completed. At that point in time, he was contacted by ComEd, which is who was running most of the power companies in Chicago, Illinois at the time. ComEd asked Mr. Insull what they should do to look to hire a president. And instead of a response, he actually sent them an application, and he therefore then became the president of ComEd. And it looks like in 1920, I believe he formed the company, Public Service Company of Northern Illinois. And in 1923, he buys the Waukegan coal plant. Funny little tidbit there at the end in 1923 as well. Insull resigns amidst charges of fraud and embezzlement. So we just have another General Electric connection there. I just wanted to catch up on that one. And then we're going to move into our next. Really? Now I'm not going to advance. Yes, manual. Come on. Okay, so aside from that, I also found an address in Jack's belongings, Mrs. Ruby Casacchio at 6601 Yale Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. It was just a cut piece of paper that was in his belongings. And I do show that this individual was legitimately in Chicago, Illinois from at least 1930 to 1954. The census does list her in the 17th ward, which we can see to the right here, where the lipstick killings occurred and where Ruby Casacchio's home was. She was explained as a suburbanite economist in the Chicago paper. And to me, that makes me kind of wonder if she wasn't one of those individuals that opened up her home to servicemen, as many single women did back in those days. They would make homes for these individuals to come through, have a nice place to stay, a warm meal, and then send them on their way. So this is just another connection, or at least another person that we know Jack is familiar with. The newspaper prints the recognition in 1954 for Ruby Casacchio. Her nephew was getting married, so she placed an ad announcing that wedding. I did find some possible relatives. I was not capable of making contact or getting in touch with any of them. Once again, I find phone numbers, I find addresses, and I don't find anybody at the end of those particular pieces of information. So when I did run the check on Ruby Kasakio's home, we can now see an empty lot where a house used to be. So we're not actually getting to see the home. And I do note that this is approximately 17 miles from the lipstick killings, so very close in proximity as well. And into our first murder of the lipstick killings, which happened on June 5th, 1945. If everybody remembers, we know that Jack enlisted on June 2nd of 1945 into the military, but he was placed on reserve for almost 30 days. I'm pretty sure at this point he probably went home to mom, as he often does, mostly to close up loose ends and get ready to be shipped out for basic training. So on June 5th, 1945, we have 43-year-old Josephine Ross at 4108 North Kenmore Avenue in Edgewater, Chicago, Illinois. Again, she's the approximate age of Ora Murray, so I don't know if this was a direct connection, if any of these individuals were researched previous to their murders or if they were just spontaneous murders. So just kind of one of those coincidences, once again, that Ora Murray back in Los Angeles area was 43 years old as well. She was presumed to have surprised an intruder. This is Josephine Ross, who then killed her. They did say that they found dark hairs found in her hand, clutched in her hand, indicating she had struggled with the intruder before she was killed. Ross's fiance had an alibi, as did her former boyfriends and ex-husbands, and the police had no other suspects. They looked for a dark-complexioned man who was reported loitering at the apartment or running from the scene, but were unable to identify or locate him. The janitor, Elmer Nelson, and a fellow tenant saw what they called a swarthy, dark-haired man in a white sweater and dark trousers, approximately 190 pounds, but the lodger, Bernice Folkman, called him slender. So we have conflicting information there, and we know that eyewitness accounts aren't always exact or precise. So she suffered from multiple stabbings and gashes in the throat. So overkill once again. The drawers had been pulled out, newspapers had been thrown everywhere, and chairs had been knocked over, which was kind of consistent with the Bauerdorf scene. So everything is trashed. Josephine Ross was also washed in the bathtub. So we have that bathtub connection again, just as we did with Bauerdorf. I also show that Thames and vinegar were submerged in water. Bauerdorf was in the bathtub, and we have a lot more that we will cover as far as waterway dumps or use of bathtubs and washing of the bodies. She was also found posed on the bed. That is very consistent with Black Dahlia, the Oakland County child killer, many more of these particular crimes. Her skirt or dress was wrapped or placed around her head. That again matches with Ora Murray and Bauerdorf. There were no valuables taken from the apartment, only change money. So again, not a full-on robbery. If somebody was looking to rob this individual, they would have taken far more for that robbery to have been more successful. The wounds were actually covered up with Scotch tape. This is information I'm getting on the internet. I'm not exactly sure the truth or validity of it. However, I'm going to go ahead and include it because we do see tape used in many different instances. So the wounds were covered with Scotch tape. The use of the tape is spoken about by this killer and in Bauerdorf and John Benet Ramsey and others. Her fiance at the time was Oscar Nordmark, and George Caraboni was a suspect for the Ohio torso murders and a local butcher in Chicago, Illinois at this time. I've kind of wondered if Jack didn't meet up with this individual that was the Ohio torso murders, just because he would have probably been enticed by learning or copying or even possibly mimicking, the acts of this particular killer. We do have letters from a supposed George to Bill Heirins while he is in prison. And Bill Heirins will get to him, but he was actually the one that was hemmed up for this crime. And he was the longest man standing in prison at the time. and passed away. So he went into custody when he was 17 years old, and I believe he died at approximately 86, 89 years old. So he was literally in prison for this entire time, and the only evidence that they stated they had against him was a smudged, bloody fingerprint, a single smudged, bloody fingerprint. In fact, his handwriting didn't even match some of the pieces of communications we're going to see in this. There was also a meat packer strike going on at this time, and Dagnan's father was in charge of meat rations to the Native Indians during this time. It also held a high-ranking position with the Office of Price Administration. So black market black market meat, if you can believe it or not, was really a thing back then. We hear a lot about black market, but none of us ever contemplated that that would be our food. So there is a black market meat packer who is decapitated at the same time. They had alluded to the fact that it may have been a mob hit or some other. They also, I think, believe that the Ohio torso killer was somebody who perpetrated that crime, but I do have that in here because it happens to be happening at the same time as these murders. There is information in a book that the suspect purportedly defecated at the scene. That is per the book, and I have the link listed there if somebody wants to run a search on it. I don't know if that's true, but it is actually said in a couple of these murders, so I did include it. And Josephine Ross was the widow of Herbert P. Ross, who died in Chicago, Illinois in 7/8 of 1944. Josephine's Ross apartment is pictured here. I'm showing you the relation to the 6601 South Yale Avenue. Again, 16.7 miles from Ruby Casacchio's house to the murder scene. Again, proximity is extremely close. And the power plant is just beyond that, probably another 15, 16 miles or so. So it may have been an area that he passed through on his way to the power plant. So here we have the relation between the power plant and Ruby Casacchio's home and the lipstick killings. We can see at the very top there, listed by letter E, is the Waukegan power plant, aka the public company of Northern Illinois. And then we see a picture of Jack, of course, that is consistent with the pictures of the power plant itself. And we can see him in his Navy uniform. My friend Reno did say as well that the Great Lakes Naval Station just in the near vicinity, we can see Great Lakes Naval Base there listed as number D, is a place where many of our Navy personnel would go to train, whether it was for basic training or for continued training or specialty training. So there's a lot of reasons why Jack could actually have been here in Chicago, aside from the fact that his mother moved to Chicago in 1944. Here are some pictures I would love to be able to identify. It looks like they're doing the building of this particular power plant at this point. So Jack has pictures from all different points of views. I'm not sure if he actually climbed. It looked like they may have had some type of a system to climb up to the top of these stacks. And this might be where we see some of the pictures that are taken overhead. There's also a possibility that Jack could have been in a airplane, because we do see these overhead views, but again, these may be coming from the stacks themselves. In fact, one of them looks like he is literally at the top of the stack, looking downward. In June 27th of 1945, this is when Jack actually goes active. So he is on reserve, as I indicated, from 6/2 of 1945 to 6/27 of 1945. This would be the perfect MO for the Zodiac, because as I follow Jack around, I always find that he commits a crime and then he's gone like a ghost. So here he would have been pulled into basic training back in San Diego, California. And that would have made him a ghost in Chicago. So if they're looking for this killer isn't even there to be found anymore. Interestingly enough as well, the San Diego Naval Training Center was at Barnett Street and Rosecrans Boulevard in San Diego, California. I just thought that was interesting because Jack's mother's maiden name is Barnett, and here he is at a naval station on a street named Barnett. The naval station is also approximately 14 miles from Cap Callan in La Jolla, California, where Bauerdorf's boyfriend had been stationed during World War II. So he is back in the LA area, at least for this particular point in time. We know that Jack has an affinity for photography, and we can see him. I have him circled in this particular picture. Jack is dead center of this entire crew, and he's also scribed the writing at the bottom of this particular picture. There is information that Jack had his own dark room at the bottom of, or in the basement of his home in 1971-72, where he would develop pictures himself, and we'll see some of those pictures that he's recreated. I do note that we had what I referred to as this tailgate C. So if you look at company commander, you see these particular block Cs that have these extracurricular strokes that come down from the top of the right-hand side and from the bottom on the right-hand side upward. I refer to that as a tailgate C, but we're going to see that again in this writing. So this is some of the first places that I had an opportunity to see the block writing, which means that Jack was using it as early as 1945, and block writing comes into play with all of these murders. The Mikado was also playing for the American troops in Tokyo, Japan during 1945, and is later used in the Zodiac killings. And the U.S. drops the atomic bomb at this particular point in time. So Jack barely gets on the ship, gets over to Japan, and the atomic bomb is dropped. This might also be where the Zodiac killer picks up the radian theory. Not exactly sure, but it does end the war previous to the expected date, and Jack's ship is turned around, and he's back in San Diego, California by September 14th, 1945. Jack is given the World War II Victory Medal, even though he was never really actually in the war. Nevertheless, this supports Jack's presence back in San Diego during the time that we are going to see the first communication that comes out of this killer. The next few slides are also some events that are taking place at this particular time around Jack. I'm not going to explain all of those. I'll let you guys read them. I'll put this slide up. You can always pause it if you're live and read the information in it. But we will talk about a couple key points. And one of those is during World War II, Lansky, who was the accountant for the mob at the time, was also instrumental in helping the Office of Naval Intelligence Operation Underworld. And this may be where the underworld, underground, secret society information we see coming out of the Zodiac killer is derived, but in which the government recruited criminals to watch out for German infiltrators and submarine-born saboteurs. According to Luciano's authorized biography, during this time, Lansky helped arrange a deal with the U.S. government via a high-ranking U.S. Navy official. So the mob is connected with the Navy. Jack, I believe, is connected with both. This deal would secure the release of Luciano from prison, which is interesting. So Lansky can make a deal with the U.S. Navy, getting Luciano released from prison. I'm not sure how that works, but I guess everybody gets something in it. In exchange, the Italian mafia would provide security for the warships that were being built along the docks in New York Harbor. Privatized security, once again, brings us back to things like CIA, Secret Services. German submarines were sinking Allied ships in great numbers along the eastern seaboard and the Caribbean coast, and there was a great fear of attack or sabotage by Nazi sympathizers. So what better way than to send the strong men from the mob? At this particular time as well, we saw that the Japanese, like the Nazis, had their hands in genocide. In the next couple of slides are the ones that you can read on your own, but similar programs that were occurring. Just like the Nazi, it was different types of experiments and things that were occurring. And for Japan, it was called Unit 731. They were operating out of China. Many people had died during these human experiments. They used different things like anthrax, syphilis, smallpox, cutting off an arm and to see how long a person takes to exsanguinate, things of that nature. And this is one of the many atrocities the U.S. has actually committed in the name of a few for the many. This information is used to create new CIA programs, which we will talk about as well, that were also used on humans for experimentation. So we'll see things like Operation Paperclip, which used Nazi scientists, Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Ultra. MK Ultra included volunteers from the military, so people were knowingly getting involved with this. Universities, I'm not really quite sure if those were known to be involved, or if they knew they were involved, or if this was just something they were perpetrating on students. But there were also unknowing participants involved in this, and to end that with a project called Midnight. And Midnight is something that we see at the very end of the Zodiac era. So this began in 1932 with General Shiro Ishii, and he continued this to the end of World War II. So they weren't basically broken into and infiltrated until the end of World War II, which was in 1945. So this was literally going on for several years. And this information, again, I'll leave it here long enough for you guys to be able to pause when you get to a TV and you want to see this, but this more or less describes some of the human experimentation that was taking place during that particular time. And a little bit more information, shows a couple pictures from what we could find. I don't know if Jack was involved with any of the cleanup in this, because he does talk about getting his weapons before the ban. The only ban that I could find on weapons at the particular time was biowarfare weapons, biological weapons. So that may have been what the Zodiac was talking about in his communications. I'm just not sure yet how that information will play out once we get to that point. And then, of course, here they have actually completed a memorial to the individuals who died in regards to Unit 731. Now we can compare this to all the US and human experimentation. So we do know that with the Nazis, they allowed many of the members that were higher ranking or had good intel to receive immunity, come to the United States, share their information with the US government, and then that way the US government could either make note, use, or attempt to do their own experiments. We'll see. I did find this while I was going through my research. It's a link on experiments conducted on the United States citizens for years. I came across 39 pages, which is over 100 different experiments or different types of programs that have been perpetrated on the US citizens. And of course, this particular page I chose to show because it literally lists public law, chemical and biological warfare program. The use of human subjects will be allowed for the testing of chemical and biological agents by the U.S. Department of Defense, accounting to congressional committees with respect to the experiments and studies. So that's a little disgusting. There's actually a law in the books that allows them to do this. You can find this at http://www.whatreallyhappened.com/WRH articles/biowar.html. Like I said, I found 39 different pages. It includes a majority of the programs we just spoke about, such as Bluebird, Paperclip, Artichoke. These are Warren Commission reports that have been pulled to organize together a brief synopsis on each one of these different types of experiments that occurred. And we can see that they literally start, it looks like, as early as 1833. I'll read one of them to you. Dr. William Beaumont, an Army surgeon physician, pioneers gastric medicine with his study of a patient with a permanently open gunshot wound to the abdomen, and writes a human medical experimentation code that asserts the importance of experimental treatments, but also lists requirements stipulating that human subjects must give voluntary, informed consent and be able to end the experiment when they want. Beaumont's code lists verbal rather than just written consent as permissible. So if there does not need to be anything in writing, there is no way to prove that any of these individuals consented to it, nor was able to remove themselves from that particular experiment when they wanted to. Very, very disgusting things that we see. And as you go through them, you're going to find all kinds of children, adults, men, women. The Tuskegee experiment, that's going to be one, which was a syphilis-based experiment. So I think we've all heard a little bit about some of these experiments, just not to the extent. If you check out this particular URL that I just put out there, then you will go down the list and find all of the different experiments, maybe not all, but a majority of the experiments that occurred from 1833 on. And that brings us into September 21st, 1945. We know that Jack is now back in San Diego as of September 14th, 1945. And we find the very first communication that we're going to talk about in this series. And it was in regards to Georgette Bauerdorf. It was almost a 1-year anniversary because she was killed on October 12th of 1944. And this letter, which we do not know when this letter was actually dropped, but it was found on a stone retaining wall by an 11-year-old near Fairfax High School, which is about a half a mile from West Hollywood. It is a typewritten communication. Again, this is one of the communications I want to do a cross-reference with the Patricia Houts letter, where he claims that he was designed as a killer as a boy. There's also the Sherry Jo Bates letter that I would like to compare it to, just to see. I know when I did a quick comparison with the Patricia Houts letter, I did find some of the capital letters that were uplifted or a little bit higher than the baseline in comparison to the middle zone letters, was consistent between those two communications. But I'm going to have to take it much deeper than that. And hopefully the versions that I have are true and correct, because we know that copies tend to add and take things away. So I have to only rely on those attributes or those characteristics that I can solidly say, yes, this is consistent, or no, this is not. So Georgette Bauerdorf killer's anniversary note reads, to the Los Angeles police, --. Now, hyphens are, we've already talked about that. That's something that Jack and the Zodiac use to break sentences, or to pause, or to begin a new statement. So here we have it happening as early as 1945. To the Los Angeles police, --, almost a year ago, Georgette Bauerdorf, age 20, Hollywood canteen hostess was murdered in her apartment in West Hollywood. And we see Hollywood is hyphenated, and then at the end of Hollywood is 2 more hyphens. Between now and October 11th, a year after her death, the one who murdered her will appear at the Hollywood canteen. The murderer will be in uniform. He has since he committed the murder been in action in Okinawa. The murder of Georgette Bauerdorf was divine retribution. Let the Los Angeles police arrest the murderer if they can, --. So these are my particular notes on it. Georgette Bauerdorf is a killer anniversary note to the police, which we see the Zodiac writing to the police. We see anniversary letters throughout this presentation. We see anniversary murders. So anniversaries are something that run in tune with this. In action in Okinawa, which Jack was in Japan, albeit briefly, he was there and then turned around and came home. The letter displayed some sort of red iodine or paint to make it look like it was blood, but I believe that they found that it was not. Again, information I'm not privy to, or they're just leading us to believe that iodine is what was used. The letter displayed some sort of the red iodine, but Zodiac always liked to leave some type of doodle drawing, drips, drops of blood, or the appearance. He would draw drops of blood on his actual letters, like the bleeding knife letter, the desktop poem reference to blood dripping. This was also a trait in the Jack the Ripper crimes, which may be an idol for Jack, especially since it's Jack the Ripper. Anniversary note is consistent with the Zodiac, Mary Thames, Sherry Jo Bates, Donna Lass, Gladys Kern, Tim Miller, and Laura Miller. And we'll look for more as we go through this. The suspect claimed he would appear at the Hollywood canteen on the anniversary of Bauerdorf's murder on or about October 11th, 1945. Now, the lipstick killer, the Oakland County child killer, would say things like, if you don't catch me soon, I will commit suicide, or you may find me at Club Tavern at Please Hurry Now. In Elizabeth Shorts frequented the Hollywood canteen, which also equals many of the homicides were after the girls left the nightclub. So Elizabeth Short, the Zodiac bar in the Sacramento murders is commented on. Coronado Inn bar in Vallejo is mentioned, and then the Oakland County child killer said that he would turn himself in at the Pony Express, sorry. And the Black Dahlia also said killer would turn himself in as a ploy as well. And of course, it's written to the LA police, which is taunting the police. That's definitely Zodiac 101. He confesses to the murder, which is Zodiac, Atlanta, Georgia, DC Freeway Phantom, Riverside Phantom, DB Cooper, Donna Lass, OCCK Child Killer, Tim Miller's finale letter. So literally this person is wanting to confess to what he's done, but we'll also see how he wants everybody to know about things he didn't do. The identification is in uniform, which again, this is very consistent with Jack being in uniform. The letter to Hoover, Red Phantom accomplice letter, the Zodiac, DB Cooper, all of these individuals have mentioned something to do with their particular appearance at the time. The hyphens that separate statements or thoughts, that's Jack and Zodiac. Hyphens used to split the topics as instead of commas and to break apart words where there's plenty of room to finish. So I find that they're hyphenating a word where if they just continued with the word, they had plenty of room to finish that word. I just think this individual likes to hyphenate things and keep things more truncated. Kind of reminds me of the media or trying to fit something into an ad or an article in the newspaper, because this is something that's very prevalent in that area or industry. Most every communication in these crimes have hyphens, which we'll see, and Jack does this as if to maintain journalistic script. So he speaks of the past and gives clues to the present. That's definitely the Zodiac. And divine retribution is almost consistent with the Black Dahlia being justified and the Cooper Revolution. I did recently speak with one of the gals that I have worked with. She likes to attempt to cipher the codes. And she had recently mentioned there was an individual named Divine who was in great power at this particular point in time. And she believes that one of the messages, or this particular message, is pointing out that this individual, this was basically retribution for this individual. I don't know the truth of that at this point, and I still need to do some research on her solve. So, and then let the police arrest me if they can. That is definitely lipstick, Zodiac, crack proof, and many more to come. So the letter below is from the suspect who claims to have been with the military in Okinawa, Japan after Bauerdorf's murder and before this note. However, Jack was said to have gotten to Japan, but the word ended and he was shipped back. It looks like I have pretty much covered all of these points already, so I'm going to pass this slide. This is just one of the newspaper clippings in regards to it, and they're calling it the killer's anniversary note to police, or at least the individual who captioned this on their website is. Oh, here we go. So she is referring to James Devine, a longtime friend of the Bush family. I'm not shocked that it leads back to Bush again or whatever it is that she found, but he was a Bush supporter. He was in the CIA and he was in Army and military intelligence. She believes that this particular communication ciphers out to include Dr. George Hodel, which may give some backing to Steve Hodel, who believes his father was involved with the Black Dahlia killings. However, she believes that he had seen something. So while he may have been involved to the extent of being privy to the information, she is not indicating through this cipher solve that he was the actual killer. Rather, it says Dr. George Hodel watched William Randolph Hearst bother Black Boy Hilliard, which Hilliard turns out to run a newspaper in Oregon sometime after, but was in the Los Angeles area and in the military at the same time as Jack. So watch William Randolph Hearst bother Black Boy Hilliard to shoot ye location. And evidently he was a photographer and they were pressuring him to shoot the pictures of this particular murder. At least that's her belief. All right, so in 1945, Albert Einstein works on the atomic clock. In 1945 is published in a bulletin of the Atomic Scientists of Chicago. So we know that the clock and time is very important to the Zodiac. I paid attention to that and brought that into this particular presentation. And the clock was very important as it was also a predictor of doomsday just before the Cold War started. So 7 minutes approaching to midnight meant imminent danger. And the atom bomb is dropped at the end of World War II. So stationed in San Diego until 9/29/1945, and then he is shipped to Tadson in San Francisco. So 1.75 hours from the training camp to Fairfax High. Los Angeles, California. Well, that's the distance between San Diego and Los Angeles. We'll see an average of about 2.5 hour vicinity for the killing radius of the Zodiac as well. It's my theory upon his release from San Diego in World War II that Jack left the Bauerdorf confession letter and hightailed it to San Francisco. And at some point, Jack would have returned on leave or for the holidays to his mother's in Chicago. And I believe that he had the opportunity and the time to travel back, as he did quite often. During World War II, the movie Charlie Chan at Treasure Island was released and played for all the soldiers at Treasure Island. So Jack was there during this particular time. And this is probably where one of his movie-themed killing sprees arose from. That it is a story about the pursuit of a serial killer who kills, blackmails, and extorts. So that literally puts us right in the realm of the Zodiac. It is set at the 1939 Golden Gate International Expedition, the World's Fair held on Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay. The evil magician of this particular movie, who is Charlie Chan, encounters someone named Dr. Zodiac, and he wears a hooded costume similar to those worn by the Texarkana Phantom, Zodiac Killer, and the Aleister Crowley and the members of his Order of the Golden Dawn, which is truly just spun off into L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology and the Rosicrucians at some point. So everything is evolved. We've given it a new name. Everybody wants to back or get away from anything that is that demises their particular affiliation or association to any type of a society. So I think they just shut it down and rename it and then start over again. And that brings us to our second murder of the lipstick killings, which is Frances Brown's apartment complex. It is also 16.7 miles from Ruby Casacchio's home, or 34 miles from the Waukegan Power Plant, aka Public Service Company of Northern Illinois. On 11/25/45, Jack makes his S1 promotion, and he may have taken a leave for this next crime, or he could have been back simply for the holidays, because we find that this is set in December, and a lot of the Zodiac crimes and other crimes occur in December. So I do have some conflicting information. I was doing some research on Frances Brown, trying to figure out which one was which and when they died, because we actually had two in Chicago, Illinois. I'm going to go with the top one because it has the date that is most consistent with most of the information on the internet. And that is Frances Brown, who was born in March 21st of 1912, died on December 10th of 1945. I also saw information that said December 20th of 1945. Again, I'm not exactly sure, nailing this stuff down. There's just not a lot of information out there. She's 33 years of age and separated from her husband, who lived in Waukegan, Illinois, so next to the Waukegan plant. She is an ex-Navy wave, so there's the Navy relation, and Frances moved to Edgewater in her own apartment. Her mother was Mary. Her father was Elijah Brown, and she was the secretary for A.B. Dick Company during World War II. So Frances Brown, an ex-wave, was discovered stabbed to death in her apartment after a cleaning woman heard a radio playing loudly and noted Brown's door partly open. Brown, too, had been savagely stabbed with the knife still in the neck, or the knife was left in the neck, and shot in the head. So we see an escalation here from stabbing to shooting. I'm not sure how people did not hear the blast of or the shooting of the gun. But force we see with Sherry Jo Bates, Tate and the Manson murders, as well as the Ketty Cabin murders, and so many more. The authorities thought a burglar had been discovered or interrupted, but as we note with the previous murders, there was no actual robbery. Minimal things were taken, even though there was plenty to take if somebody was literally looking to rob. And once she's dead, they'd probably had all the time in the world, so I'm not sure why they wouldn't have taken more things. Brown is also found in the bathtub, halfway in and bathed. Again, that's Georgette Bauerdorf, Josephine Ross, and the use of the bathtub in the future Susan Degnan, which is also part of the lipstick killings. And the Oakland County child murders were also bathed and cleaned before their bodies were dumped. The suspect placed Scotch tape over the victim's wounds. Once again, and her pajamas were wrapped around her head. So for whatever reason, once the killer is done killing, he almost wants to cover up what he's doing by using their clothing to wrap around their head or their face. Maybe he can't stand to look at it after he's completed what he's done. But again, that's consistent with Ora Murray, Georgette Bowerdorf, and Josephine Ross. Again, no valuables were taken, but someone had written a message. So we have our second communication in this presentation, written in lipstick on the wall of Brown's apartment. You can see to the bottom left-hand corner here, it says, "For heaven's sakes, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." We'll address that message and the contents of it and how it's consistent with the Zodiac killer. But I wanted people to take note to this particular image because this is typically what the public sees if they're searching this case, researching this case. And what you don't see is some of the things I'm going to talk about. So it's kind of a washed out picture, causing the writing itself to come more to the forefront. So it looks like they manipulated that picture in some way to kind of bleach out the background. The use of lipstick will be used in upcoming murders as well. So we start with lipstick on the wall, and then that later becomes used actually on bodies. That's also identical to Susan Degnan in the Black Dahlia and the werewolf murders. Police found a bloody fingerprint smudge on the door jamb of the entrance door. I believe this is the single print that they used to state they had the evidence to in jail and incarcerate Bill Heirins. Also, there was a possible eyewitness to the killer's escape. An eyewitness, George Weinberg, heard gunshots. So we did have one person, gunshots at about 4 a.m. According to John Derrick, the night clerk stationed in the lobby of the building, a nervous man of 35 to 40 years old and weighing approximately 140 pounds had gotten off the elevator, fumbled for the door to the street, and left. However, there's no inclination as to whether or not this individual was ever even in Frances Brown's apartment and may have been there for a completely different reason. It's kind of the oddity of it being in an apartment complex is that there are many people there this individual could have been visiting. This is very different to the Ross suspect, who was said to be 190 pounds and slender. So again, can we really count on eyewitness accounts when both of these murders are eerily the same? But the killer is one and the same, no doubt. They did attribute both these murders to the same person, even though we had the varying degrees of eyewitness statements. So that is possibly means that these eyewitnesses witnessed somebody who had nothing to do with these murders. So purportedly, once again, the suspect defecated at the scene of the crime. Per this particular book, I list the URL below it, but there's no way to know for this to be true or not without actually seeing the files from the police department. And here is a version that I actually came across when I was researching Bill Heirins and what he had gone through. This is, again, the picture of the writing on the wall is done in lipstick. It's apparent the author wasn't having trouble disguising his writing since he erased and used the same form. So you can see where I circled the letter M in me, and we see above that the haloing effect of what was there before. We can also see all the different I'm going to say erasures that were done as this killer was attempting to form a message. This is what got me kind of thinking about the coded messages and where they might start. I don't think that somebody naturally hops into crypto or ciphers and codes and pictograms and things of that nature. I think there's always a baby step that happens just as any MO happens with a killer. And this is my interpretation of an individual attempting to write a message that would then be decoded at some point for somebody to understand what the true meaning was. So his writing is... He seems to have erased forms that he consistently reused, so he wasn't erasing it due to an attempt to disguise rather than the content or drafting of the message just right. I contend that these erasures were due to trying to make a message within a message, like an anagram. It is common knowledge that the Zodiac used cryptographic systems in his writing, so we will be applying those systems to each and every communication. The methods we will be using are listed in the FBI FOIA files, used and accepted as methods to decipher most of the Zodiac's cryptic messages. The FBI FOIA date stamped November 4th, 1970, initial letters of words, first, second, third, last letter of words, line beginnings, line endings. We actually see this in the Melvin Belli letter. So the FOIA date stamped March 20th, 1979 indicated double encryptions, swapping letters for symbols, substitution, and transposition. Zodiac bragged about cryptograms, ciphers, anagrams, word games, word puzzles, and keys. And the lipstick killer message has been until recently washed of the actual message's content. So like I said before, if you're looking online, you don't see all these erasures that we see in the background of this particular picture. It was a detail custom made for Chicago's sensationalist press. They splashed across their front pages the shocking work of the murderer they christened the lipstick killer. I haven't given up on the idea that these were premeditated disasters so that the rich could make money after the war ended, because quite frankly, when everybody got back, men were taking back their jobs, women were becoming displaced workers. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the steel and coal and the paper industry. This is where we see things pick up. I always think that they kind of rotate who's going to make money at a particular time. So we see waves of things that come through, whether it's gas going up when there's nothing else happening. Mother's Day comes around. We see other things that will reduce in price. And that's so that we can then take and put our money in those areas that feed those particular systems. So it doesn't surprise me, or it wouldn't shock me, if he was a crisis antagonist who was committing these crimes in order to facilitate either fear, control the public, or even just the most basic feed the media, because this sold millions of newspapers, of course. I also made note in discussing with Harriet in regards to the ciphers that I had believed that there was a possibility that Jack was just the responsible author in some of these cases where he may not have committed the crime. And that would be to disseminate the information that was provided. The handwriting would not match the DNA. The fingerprints would not match the handwriting. They couldn't settle in on a single suspect if different people perpetrated different parts of the crime. So I don't rule that out either. However, these beginning crimes, I do believe that Jack was fully involved with, because he said some of the nastiest stuff that he had done just before going into the military. And this is some of the nastiest stuff in these first couple years. We do see that Jack does use that cursive shape triple hump M, as in Mary, that is seen in this particular message. So we also see the curved or hooked T's. There are a few different things in this particular message that leads us right back to Jack. This is actually a solve that was done by Lauren Swearingham. He recently, one of his solves was shown in the new documentary, The Hunt for the Zodiac. They talk about having a supercomputer that is solving a portion or a couple lines of the 340. And they are trying to tell the public now, which I've seen in a couple different areas since 2020, that there's no military connection to the Zodiac killer, which I think is a complete farce. They can literally probably get away with this because the information they're presenting now is to people who have no knowledge or background in these particular cases, nor will they ever have the time to research it. And much of the information has been taken down. So if you're not already in possession of it, you might not find much of the stuff that you're going to find in this presentation. So the reason I mentioned that the suspect may have been erasing his words or trying to arrange and draft the proper message is because, just like the Zodiac, I felt that there may have been a hidden message in this communication due to the erasures. This is not my solve. Again, this is Lauren Swearingham. However, I did recreate it based out of the letters that were used on the wall. So I had an in and out. Lauren had come in telling me that he had solved a majority of the 340 cipher, and the only name that he was able to find in that cipher solve was Jack Terrence. Of all the suspects that he attempted to find a solve for their name, his was the only one. So Mr. Swearingham reached out to me. We discussed many of the different types and styles of systems that were used. Oh gosh, we're down to a minute here. Anyways, let's just get to this message and we'll finish the information later. So basically, I told him that anagram was something I believe would have been the baby step for encoding a message within a message. And I asked him to look at the lipstick killer's message, and using all of the letters within that message, it worked out to, I'm Jack Terrence. I have slain FBR, which I'm going to allude to that meaning Frances Brown, because she is the apartment that this message is written in. I see more of them and you'll see more of me. So seeing more of them and seeing more of me, or just even the more word, we're going to find throughout all of the communications consistently talking about there being more, whether there's more underground, more above ground, there'll be more to come, there'll be more killings. More is just one of those huge themes that run around this particular suspect's writings. And I think that that's pretty much about all we have for today. Next week, we will continue with this particular slide, and we'll get deeper into the communication itself. Everybody take care and have a great week.